I was halfway through my Saturday morning coffee when I saw her marching across my front lawn like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, and a scowl that could curdle milk. My name is Nathan Lawson, and I had been living peacefully in my house in Clearwater, Florida, for 3 years before this moment turned my life into what I can only describe as a bureaucratic nightmare wrapped in pastel-colored madness. The woman who was currently trampling my carefully maintained grass was named Brenda Patterson, and she was the president of the Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association. I had dealt with her exactly twice before, once when I first moved in, and she handed me a binder thick enough to be used as a weapon, filled with HOA rules and regulations, and again 6 months ago when she complained about my mailbox being 2 inches too far from the curb. That second complaint had cost me $200 in fines and an entire weekend repositioning the thing. "Nathan Lawson," she called out before she even reached my front door. "We need to talk about your boat trailer." I set my coffee down on the kitchen counter and walked to the front door, opening it before she could assault my doorbell. "Good morning, Brenda. What about my boat trailer?" She held up her clipboard like it was a holy text. "It is in direct violation of Section 7.4.2 of the Sunset Meadows Community Guidelines. All boats, boat trailers, recreational vehicles, and commercial vehicles must be stored in enclosed garages or off-site storage facilities. They cannot be visible from the street." "My boat trailer is on my property line," I said calmly. "The back corner of my lot. You cannot see it from the street." "I can see it from Mrs. Henderson's yard next door, and Mrs. Henderson can see it from her kitchen window, which means it is visible from residential viewing areas, which falls under the same guideline." I took a deep breath. The boat trailer in question was an old thing I had picked up 3 months ago for $500. I had been restoring a 1985 Boston whaler, a project that gave me something to do on weekends besides worry about work. The trailer sat at the very back corner of my property, right along the property line that separated my lot from the undeveloped land behind our subdivision. I had specifically measured it to make sure it was entirely on my property, not encroaching on anyone else's space or the HOA common areas. "Brenda, the trailer is completely on my own property. I measured it myself. It is not on HOA common ground. It is not blocking anyone's view of anything important, and it certainly is not visible from the street." "That is irrelevant," she said, her voice taking on that particular tone that made my jaw clench. "The HOA guidelines clearly state that such items must not be visible from any residential viewing area. Mrs. Henderson has filed a formal complaint. Of course she had. Mrs. Henderson was 74 years old and had apparently decided that her retirement would be best spent finding things to complain about. Last month, it had been my lawn being cut in a diagonal pattern instead of straight lines. The month before that, she had complained about my outdoor lights being too bright, even though they were standard 40-watt bulbs and fixtures that pointed downward. "I would like to see the exact wording of that guideline," I said. Brenda flipped through papers on her clipboard, with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Section 7.4.2, subsection C. No boats, boat trailers, recreational vehicles, campers, or commercial vehicles shall be stored in any location visible from public streets or residential viewing areas. All such vehicles must be stored in enclosed garages or approved off-site storage facilities." And what constitutes a residential viewing area? Any area from which a resident can view the violation from their property. So if Mrs. Henderson can see it from her kitchen window, it counts. Correct. Brenda, by that logic, she can complain about anything in my backyard. My grill, my patio furniture, my shed. Anything she can see from her window would be a violation. Those items are permitted under Section 9.2.1, which covers standard outdoor living accessories. Boat trailers are not standard outdoor living accessories. I could feel my blood pressure rising. The trailer is on my property line, the very back corner. It is not hurting anyone. You have 14 days to remove it or you will be fined $500. After that, the fine increases by $250 per week until compliance is achieved. She tore a yellow sheet of paper from her clipboard and held it out to me. I took the paper, my hand shaking slightly with suppressed anger. This is ridiculous. This is the community we agreed to when we purchased our homes here, Nathan. Standards must be maintained. She turned on her heel and walked back across my lawn, leaving small divots in the grass with her unnecessarily sharp heels. I stood in my doorway for a long moment, staring at the yellow violation notice. 14 days, $500, increasing fines. For a boat trailer that was sitting quietly on my own property, bothering absolutely no one except a bored retiree with too much time on her hands. I called my buddy Marcus that afternoon. Marcus had lived in an HOA community in Tampa before moving to a rural area specifically to escape this kind of nonsense. When I explained the situation, he laughed so hard I thought he might choke. "Man, I told you HOAs were Satan's creation," he said when he finally caught his breath. "They are like mini dictatorships run by people who peaked in high school and want to feel powerful again. What did you do when you had problems with yours?" I fought them on every single thing until I had enough money saved to move. But I will tell you this, Nathan. Document everything. Every interaction, every measurement, every conversation. If this goes to court, you will want records. Court. Over a boat trailer. You would be amazed what HOAs will do. I knew a guy in my old neighborhood who went to court 3 times over the color of his front door. The HOA said it was burgundy. He said it was mahogany, which was on the approved list. Cost him $15,000 in legal fees before it was over. After I hung up with Marcus, I spent the rest of Saturday afternoon taking photographs and measurements. I measured the exact position of the boat trailer on my property. I took photos from every angle, including from Mrs. Henderson's property line, showing that you had to deliberately walk to the back corner of her yard and crane your neck at an awkward angle to even see the trailer. I photographed my property survey documents that clearly showed the boundaries of my lot. I compiled everything into a folder on my computer and printed copies for physical backup. Sunday morning, I decided to try the diplomatic approach. I walked next door to Mrs. Henderson's house and knocked on her door. She answered wearing a floral housecoat and an expression of deep suspicion. "Mrs. Henderson, I wanted to talk to you about the complaint regarding my boat trailer." "It is an eyesore," she said immediately. "This is a respectable neighborhood. I understand you can see it from your kitchen window, but it is completely on my property and I am using it for a restoration project. It will be gone in a few months once I finish working on the boat." "A few months? Absolutely not. It needs to go now." "Mrs. Henderson, I am not trying to cause problems. I just want to finish my project. The trailer is not hurting anything. It is lowering my property values. What if I want to sell my house? Potential buyers will see that rusty trailer and think this neighborhood is going downhill." "The trailer is not rusty. I have been maintaining it, and you cannot even see it from the front of your house or from the street." "I can see it, and that is enough. I filed a proper complaint through the appropriate channels, and the HOA has agreed with me. You have 14 days, young man." She closed the door in my face. I stood on her porch for a moment, trying to process the interaction. Young man. I was 36 years old. And the idea that my boat trailer, which was visible only if you specifically went looking for it, would somehow crater her property values was absurd. Monday morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Richard Vance, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His secretary scheduled me for a consultation on Wednesday afternoon. Work was a blur on Monday and Tuesday. I am a project manager for a construction company, and we had 3 major builds in progress, which meant my days were filled with contractor calls, permit issues, and budget reviews. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about that yellow violation notice and Brenda Patterson's smug expression. Wednesday afternoon, I left work early and drove to Richard Vance's office in downtown Clearwater. The office was in a converted historic building, all brick and tall windows. Richard himself was in his mid-50s, with graying hair and the kind of confident demeanor that comes from winning a lot of cases. I explained the situation, showing him the violation notice, my photographs, and my property survey. He studied everything carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "Okay," he said finally. "First question, is the trailer entirely on your property?" "Yes. I measured multiple times. It is at least 6 inches inside my property line on all sides." "Good." Second question. "Did you review the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions before you purchased your home?" I skimmed them. They were about 200 pages long. My real estate agent said they were standard HOA rules. Richard smiled slightly. "Always a mistake, but you are not alone. Most people do not read them until something like this happens. Here is the situation. HOAs have broad authority to enforce their rules, but that authority is not unlimited. They cannot enforce rules that are arbitrary, capricious, or selectively applied. They also cannot enforce rules that violate your property rights. So what does that mean for my case? It means we need to look at how they have enforced this rule in the past. Have other people in your neighborhood been cited for similar violations? Are there other boat trailers, RVs, or commercial vehicles visible anywhere in the community? I thought about it. There is a guy on Pelican Drive who has an RV parked on the side of his house. I have seen it there for at least a year. And someone on Sandpaper Lane has a work truck with a company logo parked in their driveway every day. Richard made more notes. "Excellent. That is called selective enforcement, and it is one of the best defenses against HOA actions. If they are allowing similar violations while targeting you specifically, that is legally problematic for them. So what do I do? First, document those other violations. Photographs with dates and locations. Second, I will draft a response to the HOA explaining that you dispute the violation notice and requesting a formal hearing before the HOA board. You have a right to a hearing before any fines are imposed. Third, we are going to request copies of all other violations issued under Section 7.4.2 for the past 5 years. If they have not been enforcing this rule consistently, we have a strong case. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer for HOA cases is $3,000. If this goes to litigation, it will be more, but most of these cases settle before trial. HOAs hate bad publicity and they hate legal fees. Once they realize you are serious about fighting, they often back down. I wrote the check, hoping it would be worth it. Thursday evening, I drove through my neighborhood with my phone, taking photographs and videos. The RV on Pelican Drive was exactly where I remembered it, a massive 30-foot class, a motorhome parked on a concrete pad beside the house, completely visible from the street. The work truck on Sandpaper Lane was a white Ford F-250 with Henderson's Plumbing written on the side in bright blue letters. I documented both, along with two other houses that had various items that could arguably fall under the same rule. A small fishing boat on a trailer in one driveway, and what looked like a commercial landscaping trailer at another house. Friday afternoon, Richard emailed me a formal response letter to send to the HOA. It was 3 pages long, professionally worded and politely but firmly laid out my position. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. The 14-day deadline came and went. I did not move the trailer. On day 15, I found another notice taped to my front door. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 and had 7 days to pay or face additional penalties. I called Richard. They fined me. Expected. Do not pay it. We are disputing the underlying violation, which means any fines based on that violation are also disputed. How is your documentation coming? I photographed 5 other violations in the neighborhood. None of them have been cited as far as I can tell. Perfect. I am going to request that formal hearing. Florida law requires HOAs to provide residents with an opportunity to be heard before imposing fines. If they refuse, that is another legal problem for them. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening at 7. It would be held at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was used for HOA meetings and occasional resident events. In the meantime, Brenda Patterson was not idle. I started receiving letters every few days, reminders about the fine, warnings about increasing penalties, a notice that if I did not comply within 30 days, the HOA would have the authority to enter my property and remove the trailer themselves, with all costs billed to me plus a 50% administrative fee. I forwarded everything to Richard, who assured me that their threat to enter my property was legally questionable at best. The day of the hearing arrived. I dressed in business casual, khakis and a button-down shirt, and brought a folder containing all my documentation. Richard met me at the community center at 6:45. The hearing room was a bland space with folding tables arranged in a U shape and cheap plastic chairs for attendees. The HOA board consisted of 5 people. Brenda Patterson as president, a man named Gerald Winters as vice president, a woman named Susan Crane as treasurer, another man named Tom Phillips as secretary, and a younger woman named Jennifer Hayes as a general board member. They sat on one side of the U, looking official and stern. Mrs. Henderson sat in the audience area, arms crossed, ready to watch the show. Brenda called the hearing to order at 7 sharp. This hearing concerns the violation notice issued to Nathan Lawson of 1247 Coral Way regarding improper storage of a boat trailer, in violation of Section 7.4.2 of our community guidelines. Mr. Lawson, you requested this hearing to dispute the violation. You have 15 minutes to present your case. Richard stood. Thank you, Madam President. My name is Richard Vance, and I am representing Mr. Lawson in this matter. First, I would like to establish that Mr. Lawson's boat trailer is positioned entirely on his own property, well within his property lines, as documented by this professional survey conducted when he purchased the home. He handed copies of the survey to each board member. Brenda glanced at it dismissively. The location on his property is not relevant. The rule states that such items cannot be visible from residential viewing areas. I am glad you brought that up, Richard said smoothly. Because that phrase, residential viewing areas, is extraordinarily vague and potentially unenforceable. Does it mean that if any neighbor can see anything from any angle, that item is in violation? Because if so, virtually everything in everyone's backyard would be a violation. The rule has been on the books for 12 years, Gerald Winters interjected. It is not vague to residents who have lived here and understood community standards. Then perhaps you can explain why there is a 30-foot RV parked at 3401 Pelican Drive that is clearly visible from the street, yet has not been cited for a violation. Richard produced photographs. Or why there is a commercial work truck with company logos parked at 2156 Sandpiper Lane. Or this boat on a trailer at 892 Heron Court. He distributed the photographs. The board members shuffled through them, expressions uncomfortable. "Those are under review," Brenda said quickly. "Under review." "The RV has been there for over a year, according to Mr. Lawson's observations and inquiries with other neighbors. The work truck is there daily. Yet Mr. Lawson receives a violation notice within weeks of placing his boat trailer on his property, in a location that is barely visible unless someone specifically goes looking for it. This is textbook selective enforcement." Susan Crane, the treasurer, spoke up. "We cannot possibly monitor every property every day. We rely on resident complaints to bring violations to our attention." "So you are admitting that enforcement is complaint-driven rather than rules-driven?" Richard asked. "That means enforcement is inherently arbitrary. Some violations are ignored because no one complains, while others are prosecuted because a neighbor has a personal grievance." "That is not what I said," Susan protested. "It is exactly what you said, and that is the problem. Florida law requires HOAs to enforce their rules uniformly and consistently. You cannot pick and choose based on who complains the loudest." Brenda's face was flushed. "Mr. Vance, this is a hearing for Mr. Lawson to explain why he believes he should not be in violation. It is not an opportunity for you to attack the HOA board." "I am not attacking anyone. I am pointing out that the violation notice is based on a vague rule that is being selectively enforced. Furthermore, I have requested copies of all violation notices issued under Section 7.4.2 for the past 5 years. I submitted that request in writing 2 weeks ago, and I have received no response. Florida Statute 720.303 requires HOAs to provide access to official records within 10 working days. You are now in violation of state law." That landed like a bomb. The board members looked at each other. Tom Phillips, the secretary, cleared his throat. "I do not recall receiving such a request. I sent it certified mail to the HOA management address listed on your website. I have the receipt and tracking information showing it was delivered and signed for by someone named Patricia Moore on the date in question." Richard pulled out more papers. "Patricia is our administrative assistant," Jennifer Hayes said quietly. "She probably just filed it. Filed it without informing the board that an official records request had been received. That is a management problem, not a legal excuse." Brenda was visibly angry now. "Fine, we will provide the records, but that does not change the fact that Mr. Lawson is in violation." "Actually, it does. Because if you cannot show consistent enforcement of this rule, the violation notice is invalid. Additionally, I would like to address the fines. Mr. Lawson has been assessed a $500 fine. Florida law requires that a resident be given at least 14 days' notice and an opportunity for a hearing before fines are imposed. The violation notice stated he had 14 days to remedy the violation or be fined. That is not the same as 14 days' notice before a fine is levied. You held this hearing after already imposing the fine, which is procedurally improper. The board was clearly not prepared for this level of legal pushback. Gerald Winters tried to regain control. "Mr. Vance, we appreciate your technical legal arguments, but the spirit of our rules is clear. We are trying to maintain property values and community standards. Boat trailers sitting around do not contribute to that goal. The spirit of the rules does not override the actual text of the rules or state law, Richard replied. And if the spirit of the rules is to maintain property values, I would suggest that consistent, fair enforcement is far more important than targeting one resident because a neighbor filed a complaint. Nothing damages property values more than an HOA that is seen as arbitrary and heavy-handed. Ask any real estate agent. I sat quietly during all of this, watching the board members squirm. Mrs. Henderson looked like she had bitten into a lemon. Brenda finally spoke, her voice tight. "We will take your arguments under advisement. The board will deliberate and provide a written decision within 7 business days." "Thank you," Richard said. "One final point. If the board upholds the violation and fines, we will be filing suit in circuit court for declaratory relief, requesting that the court invalidate the violation on the grounds of selective enforcement and procedural irregularities. We will also be requesting attorney's fees under Florida Statute 720.305, subsection 5, which allows prevailing parties in HOA disputes to recover legal costs. I mention this not as a threat, but to ensure the board is fully aware of the legal and financial implications of this matter. We left shortly after. In the parking lot, Richard grinned at me. "That went well, did it? They looked ready to murder both of us." "Good. That means they are taking this seriously. HOA boards are used to residents rolling over and paying fines. When someone actually fights back with legal representation, it changes the dynamic. My guess is they will either drop the violation or offer some kind of compromise." "What kind of compromise?" "Maybe they will say you can keep the trailer if you put up screening plants, or they will give you a longer timeline to complete your project. Something that lets them save face while backing down." 7 business days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. I opened it with Richard on speakerphone. The letter stated that, upon further review, the board had determined that the violation would be upheld, but the fine would be reduced to $250 as a gesture of goodwill. I was given an additional 30 days to remove the trailer before further fines would be assessed. "Reduced fine and extended timeline," Richard said. "That is them trying to compromise without admitting they were wrong." "So now what?" "Now we file suit. They had a chance to do the right thing. They are still asserting they have the authority to fine you for something that is not a legitimate violation. Time to let a judge sort it out." I felt my stomach drop. "We are really going to court over this? Unless you want to pay the fine and move your trailer, yes." "But Nathan, this is not just about your trailer anymore. This is about whether an HOA can selectively enforce vague rules to target individual residents. If you back down, they will do this to someone else next month, someone who might not have the resources to fight." He was right. But that did not make writing another check for legal fees any easier. Richard filed the lawsuit in Pinellas County Circuit Court the following week. The complaint requested declaratory relief, asking the court to rule that the HOA's violation notice was invalid due to selective enforcement and vague rules. We also requested an injunction preventing the HOA from assessing any fines while the case was pending. The HOA fought the injunction, but the judge granted a temporary stay on fines until a hearing could be held. That hearing was scheduled for 2 months out, which meant I had a temporary reprieve, but also meant this situation was going to drag on for a while. In the meantime, something interesting happened. Other residents started approaching me. A man named Kevin from 2 streets over stopped me at the grocery store and told me about his ongoing battle with the HOA over a fence they claimed was 6 inches too tall. A woman named Paula, who lived near the neighborhood entrance, told me about being fined for planting flowers that were not on the approved plant list. Another man named Steve said the HOA had threatened him with fines over his son's basketball hoop. Word was spreading that someone was finally pushing back, and people were angry about years of what they saw as petty tyranny. I created a Facebook group for neighborhood residents who had issues with the HOA. Within 2 weeks, it had 47 members. Within a month, over 90. People shared their stories, their violation notices, their frustrations. A pattern emerged. Brenda Patterson had been president for 6 years, and during that time, the number of violation notices had tripled compared to previous administrations. Fines had increased. The list of approved exterior paint colors had shrunk from 30 options to 12. New rules had been added almost quarterly, often without proper notice to residents. One resident, a retired paralegal named Dorothy, did some digging into the HOA finances. She discovered that in the past 2 years, over $30,000 in fines had been collected, but there was no clear accounting of where that money had gone. The community pool had not been resurfaced as promised. The landscaping of common areas had actually decreased. Streetlights that needed repair stayed broken for months. Dorothy posted her findings in the Facebook group, and things exploded. An emergency petition was circulated, requesting a special meeting of the HOA membership to discuss board performance and financial management. Florida law requires HOAs to hold such a meeting if requested by at least 10% of members. The petition gathered signatures from 23% of households within 1 week. Brenda tried to delay the meeting, but Richard, who was now informally advising several residents on HOA matters, sent a letter explaining that refusing to hold a properly petitioned meeting was a violation of Florida Statute 720.303. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, 6 weeks after I had first received that yellow violation notice. The community center was packed. Folding chairs filled every available space, and people lined the walls. Over 200 residents showed up, in a neighborhood with about 450 households. That was an unprecedented turnout. Brenda called the meeting to order, clearly unhappy. This special meeting has been called to address resident concerns regarding board actions and financial management. We will take comments for up to 2 hours. Dorothy went first. She presented her financial findings with charts and spreadsheets, the missing accounting for fine revenue, the promised improvements that never happened. The fact that Brenda had apparently approved several expenditures without full board votes, including paying herself a $5,000 annual stipend that was not mentioned in the HOA budget or disclosed to residents. That stipend was approved by the board 3 years ago, Brenda protested. It is compensation for the time I spend managing HOA affairs. Where is the documentation of that approval? Dorothy asked. I have reviewed the meeting minutes from the past 4 years. There is no record of such a vote. Brenda sputtered but had no good answer. Other residents stood and shared their experiences. Kevin talked about his fence battle. Paula talked about her flower fine. Steve talked about the basketball hoop. A pattern emerged of Brenda using the HOA rules as a personal fiefdom, targeting people she had disputes with while ignoring violations by people she liked. Mrs. Henderson actually stood up and defended Brenda. Some people are simply trying to cause trouble because they do not want to follow the rules. Rules exist for a reason. A man in the back shouted, "Then why does your son park his boat in your driveway every weekend when he visits? I have seen it there dozens of times. Where is his violation notice?" Mrs. Henderson turned red and sat down quickly. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, A motion had been made and passed to conduct a full financial audit of the HOA, paid for by HOA funds. A second motion was made to hold a recall election for the board president position. That motion passed with 87% support. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. "This is outrageous. I have volunteered countless hours for this community." "Then you should welcome the audit as an opportunity to show everything is in order," Dorothy said sweetly. The recall election was scheduled for 4 weeks later. In the meantime, my court case moved forward. The preliminary hearing was held on a Tuesday morning. Richard argued that the HOA's violation notice was invalid due to selective enforcement, vague rules, and improper procedure in assessing fines. The HOA's attorney, a young man who looked fresh out of law school, argued that HOAs have broad discretion to enforce their rules and that judges should defer to board decisions. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Hendricks, listened to both sides and asked pointed questions. She was particularly interested in the evidence of other violations that had not been cited. "Counselor, how does your client explain the RV that has been parked on Pelican Drive for over a year without any violation notice?" she asked the HOA attorney. "Your Honor, the HOA cannot monitor every property constantly. Enforcement is necessarily complaint-driven. But when complaints are selectively filed and selectively acted upon, that creates an arbitrary enforcement system. Is your client prepared to cite all the other violations that Mr. Vance has documented?" The attorney hesitated. "We would need to review each situation individually. In other words, no. You are defending the HOA's right to enforce rules against Mr. Lawson while simultaneously declining to enforce the same rules against others. That troubles me greatly." Judge Hendricks did not rule from the bench, but her tone suggested she was leaning our way. She gave both sides 2 weeks to file supplemental briefs and scheduled a final ruling for 1 month out. The recall election happened on schedule. Brenda Patterson lost by a landslide. Over 70% of voting members voted to remove her as president. Gerald Winters, the vice president, assumed the role temporarily, and a special election was scheduled to fill the position permanently. The day after the recall results were announced, I received a phone call from Gerald. "Nathan, this is Gerald Winters. I wanted to reach out personally to discuss your situation. I am listening. Look, I know things have gotten out of hand. Brenda was very zealous in her interpretation of the rules. The board has had a chance to review your case with fresh eyes, and frankly, we do not think the violation notice should have been issued. Your boat trailer is on your property. It is not causing any real problems, and we have not been consistent in enforcing that particular rule. So what are you proposing?" "We would like to withdraw the violation notice and dismiss the fine entirely. In exchange, we are asking that you dismiss your lawsuit. We want to move forward in a more collaborative way with residents, and continuing litigation is not productive for anyone." I was quiet for a moment. "What about all the other violations you have not enforced? Are you going to start citing those?" "No. We are going to revise the rule to be more specific and reasonable. Probably something like no vehicles or trailers in front yards or visible from the street. Items in backyards or side yards that are not visible from the street would be permitted. It is a rule that makes more sense and that we can actually enforce consistently. And the financial audit, moving forward, we want to be transparent. If there were issues under Brenda's management, we want them identified and corrected." I talked it over with Richard. He thought it was a reasonable resolution. "You have already accomplished more than most people do in HOA disputes. You got the president recalled. You forced them to back down on your violation. and you started a movement for reform in your neighborhood. Taking this to a full trial would cost you more in legal fees and take months, possibly over a year if they appeal. Sometimes knowing when to accept victory is the smart move. We agreed to the settlement. The HOA withdrew the violation notice, dismissed all fines, and agreed to pay $5,000 toward my attorney's fees. In exchange, I dismissed the lawsuit. The settlement was documented in writing and signed by both parties. The financial audit was completed 6 weeks later. It revealed that Brenda had indeed been paying herself an unapproved stipend for 3 years. Additionally, she had been using HOA funds to pay for her own personal expenses, disguised as community expenditures. Things like office supplies that were delivered to her house, restaurant meals claimed as board meeting expenses when no meetings had been held, and gas charges for her personal vehicle claimed as travel for HOA business. In total, she had misappropriated approximately $18,000 over a 3-year period. Dorothy, the retired paralegal who had done the initial digging, insisted that the matter be referred to law enforcement. The HOA board voted to file a report with the Clearwater Police Department. The investigation took 2 months. During that time, Brenda hired an attorney and tried to argue that the payments were legitimate compensation for her volunteer work. But the evidence was overwhelming. HOA records, bank statements, credit card receipts, and testimony from other board members who confirmed they had never approved the payments or the expenses. Brenda Patterson was arrested on a Tuesday morning in October. The charges were fraud and embezzlement. The amounts involved were enough to make it a third-degree felony under Florida law. I was not at the arrest, but Kevin, the neighbor who had fought the fence battle, lived 2 houses down from Brenda. He told me that 3 police officers showed up at her door at 8 in the morning and walked her out in handcuffs. Mrs. Henderson, Brenda's biggest supporter, watched from her window and then closed her blinds. The neighborhood Facebook group erupted with the news. Some people felt bad for Brenda, saying she had made mistakes but did not deserve criminal charges. Most felt vindicated that their suspicions about mismanagement had been proven correct. Brenda's case moved through the criminal justice system slowly. She initially pleaded not guilty, but eventually accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to reduce charges of scheme to defraud, a third-degree felony, in exchange for a sentence of 2 years of probation, restitution of $18,000 to the HOA, and 200 hours of community service. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Florida. The sentencing hearing was held in early December, about 6 months after that Saturday morning when Brenda had marched across my lawn with her clipboard. I attended the hearing, along with Dorothy and several other residents. The judge gave Brenda a stern lecture about abusing positions of trust and reminded her that HOA board members are fiduciaries with legal obligations to the people they serve. Brenda left the courthouse looking older and smaller than she had before. Mrs. Henderson was there to support her, but even she seemed subdued. In the months that followed, the HOA underwent significant changes. A new president was elected, a retired accountant named Michael who ran on a platform of transparency and reasonable enforcement. The rules were revised to be clearer and more specific. A new process was established for reviewing violation notices, requiring photographs, documentation, and approval from at least 3 board members before fines could be assessed. The Facebook group remained active, but the tone shifted from complaints to collaboration. People used it to share recommendations for contractors, organize neighborhood events, and discuss legitimate community issues like street safety and park improvements. My boat restoration project was completed in January. The Boston Whaler, once a tired wreck, was now a beautiful little fishing boat with a fresh paint job, a rebuilt engine, and new upholstery. I launched it on a sunny Saturday at a local boat ramp, and it ran perfectly. The trailer sat in my backyard for a few more weeks, and then I sold it to a guy who responded to my Craigslist ad. I did not need it anymore, and honestly, I was ready to move on from the whole situation. On a warm evening in February, almost a full year after the boat-trailer dispute began, I was sitting on my patio, grilling dinner and enjoying the sunset. Kevin walked over with a six-pack of beer. "Thought you might want some company," he said, handing me a cold bottle. "Always." "How is your fence situation?" "Resolved." The new board agreed it was fine as is. Turns out it was exactly the height specified in the rules. Brenda just did not like it because it was vinyl instead of wood. We sat and talked for a while, watching the sky turn orange and purple. Other neighbors wandered over. Paula brought homemade cookies. Steve and his wife joined us with their kids. Before long, we had an impromptu neighborhood gathering happening in my backyard. Mrs. Henderson watched from her kitchen window. I saw the curtain move and caught a glimpse of her face. For a moment, I considered inviting her over. But then I remembered the months of stress, the legal fees, the hours spent fighting an unjust violation notice, and I decided some bridges were better left unbuilt. The community settled into a new rhythm. The HOA still existed, still had rules, still sent out violation notices when truly necessary. But the tone was different. It felt less like a dictatorship and more like what it was supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together to maintain a nice place to live. I learned some important lessons from the whole experience. First, never assume that authority figures are always right, even in something as mundane as an HOA. Second, documentation is everything. The photographs, measurements, and records I kept were crucial to building my case. Third, sometimes fighting back against injustice, even small injustice, is worth it, not just for yourself but for everyone else who might be targeted next. And fourth, the most important lesson: always read the HOA rules before you buy a house. I am only half joking about that one. My relationship with the neighborhood changed after everything settled. People knew me now, not just as the guy in the blue house on Coral Way, but as the person who had stood up and fought when something was not right. That came with a certain amount of respect, but also responsibility. People asked my opinion on HOA matters. They wanted advice on dealing with violation notices. I became an informal advocate, helping people understand their rights and navigate the system. I never wanted to be that person, the neighborhood activist. I just wanted to restore my boat in peace. But sometimes life pushes you into roles you did not expect, and you have to decide whether to step up or step back. I chose to step up, and I think the neighborhood is better for it. The boat trailer that started everything ended up being a catalyst for real change. What Brenda Patterson saw as an eyesore that violated community standards turned out to be the thread that, when pulled, unraveled years of mismanagement and abuse of power. She demanded I move my boat trailer, something that was entirely on my own property line, and in doing so, she set in motion a series of events that led to her own downfall. There is a certain poetic justice in that. These days, I go fishing on my restored Boston Whaler most weekends. Sometimes Kevin comes along, or Steve, or other neighbors I have gotten to know through all of this. We catch snapper and grouper in the Gulf, drink beer, and complain about work and politics and everything else people complain about. But we do not complain much about the HOA anymore. It is not perfect. No organization run by volunteers ever is. But it is better, more fair, more transparent. And when issues come up, there is now a process for residents to be heard without being dismissed or steamrolled. I still have the original yellow violation notice in a folder in my office. I kept it as a reminder that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult and expensive and stressful, matters. That piece of paper represents a choice I made to not just accept an unjust decision, to not just pay the fine and move on, but to fight for principle. It was not about the boat trailer. It was never really about the boat trailer. It was about whether a small group of people could wield arbitrary power over their neighbors without accountability. It was about whether rules could be enforced selectively based on personal grievances rather than actual violations. It was about whether community standards meant maintaining actual standards or just enforcing the preferences of whoever happened to be in charge. When Brenda Patterson marched across my lawn that Saturday morning, she thought she was enforcing community guidelines. What she was actually doing was exposing a broken system that needed reform. She thought she had the power to force me to comply. What she did not realize was that power without accountability is fragile, and when challenged, it often crumbles. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to work. When I brought evidence of selective enforcement and procedural irregularities, the court took it seriously. When financial mismanagement was discovered and reported, law enforcement investigated, and prosecutors held someone accountable. The checks and balances that exist to prevent abuse of power did their job, but none of that would have happened if I had just paid the fine and moved the trailer. That is what Brenda was counting on. That is what people like her always count on. That most people, when faced with conflict and legal fees and stress, will choose the path of least resistance. That they will grumble and complain but ultimately comply, even when compliance means accepting injustice. I am not saying everyone should turn every HOA dispute into a legal battle. Sometimes the smart move is to compromise or let things go. But when the principle is important, when the injustice is clear, when fighting back might benefit not just yourself but others who come after you, then it is worth standing your ground. The neighborhood changed in other ways too. The recall election and Brenda's criminal case made news in the local Clearwater papers. Other HOA communities in the area started asking questions about their own boards and finances. Several other neighborhoods conducted audits. 2 other HOA presidents in nearby subdivisions resigned amid investigations into financial irregularities. It turned out that our situation was not unique. HOAs across Florida, and probably across the country, had similar issues with power-hungry board members, selective enforcement, and financial mismanagement. Our fight became a catalyst for broader reform, or at least broader awareness. Dorothy, the retired paralegal who did so much of the financial investigation work, started a consulting business helping other neighborhoods audit their HOA finances and review their governance procedures. She is busier now in retirement than she was during her career. Richard Vance, my attorney, got enough new HOA dispute clients from our case that he now specializes in that area of law almost exclusively. He told me he has never been busier and that he thanks me regularly for the referrals, even though I never actually referred anyone. They just found him because his name was in the news stories about our case. Even Michael, the new HOA president, found unexpected purpose in the role. He took a situation that could have remained toxic and contentious and turned it into something functional and positive. Under his leadership, the HOA sponsored neighborhood events like a summer barbecue, a holiday lights contest, and a community garage sale. Things that brought people together instead of dividing them, Mrs. Henderson never apologized to me. I did not expect her to. Some people are incapable of admitting when they are wrong. She still lives next door, still peers out her window at everyone's yards, but she has not filed any HOA complaints since Brenda's recall. Maybe she learned something, or maybe she just does not want to be associated with another failed crusade. I see Brenda occasionally around town. Once at a grocery store, once at a gas station. We do not speak. She looks away quickly, pretending she has not seen me. I do not take pleasure in her downfall. What happened to her was a consequence of her own choices, her own actions. But I do not gloat about it either. The whole experience taught me something about communities and how they function. Every neighborhood, every organization, every group of people living or working together needs structure and rules. Without them, you get chaos. But rules without fairness, enforcement without consistency, power without accountability, those things create a different kind of chaos, one that is often worse because it comes wrapped in the appearance of legitimacy. HOAs serve a legitimate purpose. They maintain common areas, enforce basic standards that protect property values, and provide a mechanism for neighbors to work together on shared issues. But like any organization with power over people's lives and property, they need oversight, transparency, and accountability. Most HOA board members are well-meaning volunteers trying to help their communities. But some, like Brenda Patterson, see the position as an opportunity for control and personal benefit. And without residents willing to push back, those people can cause tremendous damage. My boat trailer is gone now. The violation notice that started everything is a piece of paper in a folder, but the changes that resulted from that conflict, those are permanent. They improved life for hundreds of families in my neighborhood. They exposed corruption and led to accountability. They showed other communities that reform is possible, all because I refused to move a boat trailer that was entirely on my own property. I finished my restoration project. I fought an unjust violation notice. I helped expose financial mismanagement and saw someone held accountable for their crimes. I did not set out to be a neighborhood hero or activist. I just wanted to work on my boat. But sometimes the right thing finds you, and you have to decide whether to engage or walk away. I chose to engage, and while it was stressful and expensive and time-consuming, I do not regret it. The neighborhood is better now. The HOA is better now. And I have a beautiful restored Boston whaler that I take fishing on sunny weekends. A constant reminder that standing up for what is right can lead to positive change. When I am out on the water, engine humming smoothly, sun on my face, fishing line in the water, I think about how all of this started with one unreasonable demand from one power-hungry HOA president. And I think about how that one moment, that one decision to fight back instead of comply, changed so much for so many people. Life is unpredictable that way. You never know when a simple conflict over a boat trailer will turn into something bigger, something meaningful, something that matters. I am just glad I was stubborn enough to see it through.